I'm Chris Bussing. Welcome to my channel. It's committed to helping more people break into technology sales and use the career path to create more freedom in their life and move down the path of entrepreneurship. Now, if you're looking to become an entrepreneur, then this episode is for you. We've got an amazing guest, Rich Robinson, a personal mentor and a mentor to many when it comes to starting a startup. This guy has founded startups as a founding executive. He started companies as a founder. He's invested in startups, been on the board of startups. And currently he hosts the Founder Insights podcast on behalf of Animoca Brands, who invests in Web3 and blockchain technologies. So he's really on the cutting edge of technology. This guy also has done stand-up with Louis C.K., right, Rich?
Yes, I have. My job was to open for Louis C.K. and make him look just that much better in comparison to me. And I did my job very well.
And he's a keynote speaker, right? So there's so much to learn from Rich today, and I'm so excited to have him. If you get value out of this video, which I'm assuming you will, make sure to hit the like button because the YouTube algorithm loves that too, and we'll show this to more people who could benefit from the message. Of course, finally, before we dive in, make sure to subscribe to the channel for more inspiring interviews every week with people like Rich. Rich, thank you so much for joining. And I'm curious, you're a jet setter. Where are you at in the world currently?
I'm in my home in the island of the gods in Bali, Indonesia. After being on the road for 5 weeks, I'm licking my wounds, settling back in. Mini shampoo collection complete, level reached. Ding, 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 ding. Back to Bali.
So how did you end up in Bali, by the way?
I first came to Bali 30 years ago when I did an around the world trip. Same time I fell in love with China. And I lived in China for a quarter of a century and then came here for Chinese New Year with the family for Chinese New Year in 2020 and got pretty much stranded. Pandemic refugees, if you will, gratefully, eagerly so, and have been here for 3.5 years now doing everything through this little pinhole to the rest of planet Earth. And I think COVID, that's one of the gifts of COVID, is that it accelerated us into the future. And allowed us to work from wherever.
Yeah, it's so nice to have that flexibility. I actually moved out to LA in the pandemic and I realized that wasn't where I wanted to be, but being able to be remote, I was able to hop to, what is home now, Austin, Texas. And I know you're familiar. You probably come here for South by Southwest and other events, but what are, before we dive into some of your stories and life experiences, what are like a couple things you love about Bali in particular?
Bali is in Indonesia, and Indonesia is the 4th largest country in the world. And wow. It's basically, China will soon be surpassed by India. But it's China, India, US, Indo, with about 280 million people. It has 17,000 islands, 10%, even though it's, what does that come out to be? 4% of the world's population is here. 10% of the world's languages are here.
Wow.
It is the world's largest Muslim majority nation. Bali is a 1,900-year-old Hindu kingdom inside of Indonesia. Island next door, Lombok. Muslim island next door to that. Flores, former Portuguese colony, Christian. Island next door to that. Sumbawa, some sort of like animistic, ancient, like pagan religion. It's a fascinating place. The language, the culture, the history is fascinating, and that's nestled in Southeast Asia. And I would contend that as 60% of the world's population is in Asia, but more like 80% of the world's dynamism is here in Asia. And I'm specifically all in on Web3. The internet and blockchain had a baby, and that's Web3. And that is my act 3. And as my third act, I fully embrace it. And I feel that Southeast Asia is specifically an epicenter for Web3, as we saw with this game, Axie Infinity and the Philippines. But, the tip of the spear for gaming, tip of the spear for Web3 is gaming. And most of the world's gamers are in Asia. Most of the world's crypto users are in Asia. Very young population. There's just I feel like all that is old is new again. I feel like China in the 90s, 20, 30 years ago. And there's just tons of opportunity. And on top of that, by the way, 8 degrees south of the equator, just paradise on earth in terms of weather. So it's not too hot, never gets cold. It's got a wet and dry season. And the jungles and the rice fields and the volcanoes and the beaches and the surfing and the Local culture is amazing, and the expat community is thriving and throbbing, and amazing food and services here. Best non-urban airport hub in Asia. Terrible traffic because it's just a little too popular, but I mostly spend time in a small circle here in Ubud, working from home and exercising and, going to my little girl's school. And I avoid that. So I'm loving it.
It's definitely a little warmer than your old stomping grounds in Boston, right?
Boston and Beijing, same parallel, and same bitter soil and attitude.
Yeah.
Same weather, same, I guess, grittiness in a way. Beijing and Boston. So I spent 20 years in Boston, 20 years in Beijing, and I love it. My wife says she loves me too, and people are like, "Really?" She says, "But I often don't like him," and they're like, "Oh, totally, I get that, right?" So I love you, Boston. I love you, Beijing. I just don't like you sometimes. That's all. I don't want to. I don't want to live in New England right now. I don't want to live in Beijing. I love to visit there, but I want to live here. I'm optimizing for all aspects. Self-care. I feel like that's something that, I'll leave him a name, but I have a friend who came and stayed with me, and super amazing guy, just the most lovely human being. But he amazing career, beloved by many, really compromised his health during his career, and he came to Bali to kind of hit the reset button. And it's a very common theme that I see, is that people are like ambitious, status, impact, wealth, power, whatever. I just go for that. And there's a parable of a craftsman trying to craft the perfect vase. Oops, I think my camera knocked it out. Oopsie. I just I have a new
Your audio is crystal clear.
Audio is crystal clear. I have a new software that just took over my camera.
Well,
And
by the way, Rich, we got some live people in Limit Break Ultra, and I'm not sure your first name, but it says "Let's go." Omer okay. I think Rich is going to join soon, but Omer, great to see you. Des, great to see you, my friend. Cool. Let's see. Yeah, Rich, can you hear me? Just for context, guys, I met Rich through tech sales. When I started at Oracle, I was out at a dinner with some field sales reps, and I said I wanted to be a professional speaker. I had that dream. And this woman there said, "You should meet my cousin Rich. He is a professional keynote speaker." And I ended up meeting Rich, and he gets thousands of people reaching out on LinkedIn. And it was pretty miraculous that I got in touch with him. So he's been a great mentor, and hopefully we can figure out this audio. For this
audio's fine. I use this app, and it's really interesting how it's somehow telling this app has taken over. I'm gonna have to jump out and jump back in. Sorry.
You're good. Yeah, thank you guys for showing up. It's a little late on a Monday. Losing track of the days though. I was just in Vegas at a rock festival called Sick New World. We had System of a Down playing and Korn and all these famous bands. It was amazing. I actually slept from 2 p.m. yesterday till this morning. But yeah, I feel like that in between stand-up comedy act that's trying to keep the show going while we're waiting for Rich, the superstar. But I'm sure he'll jump on soon. Rich has actually traveled the world, and hopefully we can learn a little bit about some of his life lessons from going everywhere from France and Germany, obviously, to the Middle East and Asia. So he's actually learned quite a bit about entrepreneurship through traveling. But yeah, Rich, you actually challenged my improv skills too, and I feel like I'm doing a good job. And we've got people live, by the way. I don't know if you heard about that.
I did.
Ultra says, "Let's go wild." That's awesome. Des says she confirmed her retirement spot in Bali. Check mark. So And Omer, thanks
Boomtown.
for sharing. So we're enjoying story time, but where were we? Let's see.
Well,
Well,
so there's this
self-care.
parable of this this
Self-care.
craftsman, let's say somewhere in Asia, and it's a multi-generational business, and he's striving to make the very best, most optimal, perfect vase. And he's the first one in the morning, sparking up the kiln, and the last one at night. And one night he stays late. He's been at it for decades, and none of his ancestors have been able to do it. And everybody's left, and he kneels up on the kiln, and he reaches in to reposition the vase, and he falls in and gets subsumed into the fire. And the next morning, his staff show up. He's not there. The kiln's cold. It's very unusual. And they look inside the kiln, and there it is. The most perfect vase. He did it. He absolutely did it. He gave face to his ancestors. He created the perfect vase. But in doing so, he completely destroyed and subsumed himself. So the point there is that I think there's a certain gear shift. I think we should always be focused on self-care, but for sure, at a certain age and stage, you really have to make it just as much of a part of your ambition to do whatever. And I think it's fine to have any kind of ambition, but a lot of people just go, you know what? I don't need to sleep. I can eat like shit. Screw exercise. I can be stressed out. I don't need to spend time with people. I'm focused on this. I'm heads down. And the fact is that, like I said before, people are seeking something, status, impact, wealth, power, whatever. And it's all well and good in moderation, but there's a very, very, very clear, super well-researched study in Harvard, back in my hometown in the shitty of Boston, where they took 90 years ago, they took 100 Harvard students. One of them was JFK, and 100 people of my ilk, kind of like uneducated immigrants, mostly from Ireland. And they tracked them for, and now it's nearly a whole century. And they asked them, what's going to predict your happiness? And it is unequivocally clear that it's all about relationships. It's about people. That's the number one indicator of happiness, and people don't have true happiness without relationships. So if you seek, status, power, wealth, impact, whatever it is, then those should be in service to relationships and to other people. And, you should take care of yourself along the way. So my point there is that I've never not lived in an urban environment, and Bali is very much a resort place. So many people, I went there for my wedding, for my honeymoon. I had a beautiful time there. But, I invest, minimum of 14 hours a week, 2 hours a day into self-care. And Bali is beautiful for that. And what does that mean? That means, in addition to sleeping, it means meditation, and it means movement, and it means, even time with good people. So that's why Bali has been so great for me, is that it hasn't made me softer. It's made me way more balanced and given me a lot more energy, and really nurtured myself so that when I do show up, I can be all in.
It's great to get a sense of the self-care routine of a serial entrepreneur. Because guys, if this is where we want to be, it's helpful to know how to go down the path without burning out, and becoming that person that got fully consumed in the vase. Although they achieved the goal of the most perfect vase, was it really worth it? Maybe. But for me, I personally
no,
think,
it's not. It's not. It's not ever. It's not ever. It isn't. It just isn't. It's a false god. It is a mirage. And yes, sometimes you have to go to the mattresses. If I may use a Godfather quote, where Marlon Brando, the Don gets shot, and they have to go all in, and they bring the mattresses to his villa, and they're all living there and just 24/7 just protecting him and all that. And sometimes you have to do some sort of crazy sprints, and sometimes you have to be up all night to raise money or do whatever. But that's not sustainable, and that's not how you win. I don't think. And of course, Elon Musk, and we're not Elon Musk. And maybe it's a certain gear in your 20s, but in your 30s, 40s, 50s, you have to build in the habits so that you're able to be sustainable, because the most likely outcome is failure. If you're an entrepreneur, you're probably going to fail.
Yeah.
And the ride along the way is probably going to be pretty shitty. Even if you're doing well, it could be shitty. So
Yeah.
you have to take care of yourself along the way.
So, Rich, I was going to ask you, and you kind of answered it, I think, but maybe you could add some more color. Having started many companies, advised, and just basically been a part of many startup organizations, having been a speaker and continue to be a speaker and a stand-up comedian, and having traveled the world, what are some of the things that have brought you the most joy? And I think we kind of gave us the answers to the test based on the longest study on happiness, which is relationships. Is there anything you would add to expand on that, or any additional things that have brought you true joy?
Certainly, I think the long lasting kind of joy, of course, is in relationships, but I think also in doing hard things. I think
Mm,
that's where a lot of joy is found, in
mm,
embracing your humanity, going to the edge of your humanity. Like when I rode a bicycle through Africa for 4 months, and I did that by myself. It's the equivalent distance of Boston to LA,
wow.
3,000 miles, 5,000 K.
Wow.
I did
Yeah.
4,000 K, and the rest with some other assistance due to breakdowns, weather, sickness, whatever. But uh, yeah, those kind of, like Forrest Gump talks about that when in the movie where he's reminiscing about how he saw a mountain and a lake, and the lake was so still he couldn't tell the difference between the reflection and the actual mountain. And I think a lot of life is like that, where you travel and entrepreneurship, I think, are very good parallels. People ask me, how do I become an entrepreneur? And I was like, well, you can just be an entrepreneur. You can just, dive in, figure it out along the way. That's one way of doing it. Another way is to join a startup and be very, very close to a founder and ask to shadow them. I want to be in the board meetings. I want to help make the board pack. I want to be in
Yep.
these meetings. I want to, increase my hours by 50% just so I could be there and smell everything, right? Put
Yes.
more stuff on my, you're stuck, call me up at 2 a.m. and tell me to put something on my back, right? Sometimes you have to embrace that, in the very early part of your career. And, maybe if you want to go up the steep learning curve. But a third way that I think is actually really valuable is to do some travel, like off the beaten path, seat of the pants. This kind of sucks. It's a little bit almost reckless and dangerous. And I'm very, very much off balance. And oh boy, I woke up and it's all still here again. And I think what I learned I spent almost 4 years living out of a backpack, is that most of life is along this kind of baseline. And once in a while, high, high, low, low. But for the most
Yes.
part, you're really hugging that baseline. And entrepreneurship's not like that. Entrepreneurship is like this before
Mm,
lunch. If you're really going into all in, and travel can be the same. And then you just expand, you recalibrate your ability to be able to withstand that, and to be able to even embrace that and to seek it when you're like, well, wait a second. A lot of people try to revert to the mean and just, I want to go back to the comfortable stasis. And I get that. And that's why entrepreneurship is not for most people. But if you feel like, oh, wait a second, I'm too comfortable now. This is, I'm not learning. Like, oh, how was your workout at the gym? Oh, it was great. My heart rate didn't go up, just 3 to 5%. I didn't sweat. I didn't breathe very heavy. I didn't tax my muscles. It's like, that doesn't sound like a workout. It sounds like you were watching Netflix or something, right? And it's the same thing with travel. You should be uh, embracing comfortable with discomfort, and the same thing with entrepreneurship. So I think that's where I found joy. I found joy in doing things where I suck. And a couple of examples: I moved into Web3 in the last couple of years, and
yep.
I'm the dumbest guy in the room. And it's a gift.
Yeah.
It's an absolute gift. I seek it. I've really embraced yoga. And I think for exercise, I think of the three categories of strength, cardio, flexibility, balance. And strength and cardio, I put a lot of time and treasure into. Flexibility, balance, not so much. And I
I relate
really,
to
really, yes, right. Most guys do. And I think especially older guys, old barnacled boats like myself, like
that.
I literally spent 2 years prepping my body just to be able to start yoga. And that's a whole nother rabbit hole right there. I'm debarnacling myself, but now I'm into it, and I'm, it's not a contest, it's a practice, it's a journey with yoga.
Yes.
But if there is a contest to see who's the suckiest guy in the room, who's like Shrek, then I win. I absolutely win every time. And I just don't, I'm just starting to taste a little bit of like neutrality, not even enjoyment with it, but I know it'll come. I know it'll come. And, I eagerly seek that's the path. I love that quote from Marcus Aurelius, is the obstacle is the way.
Yes.
That great book by
Ryan Holiday.
Ryan Holiday. And, so if the impediment to your goal is the path to take. And I think, that's related to it, but I think in some ways you should seek those challenges and impediments over and over and over and keep, there's a great book by Principles by Ray Dalio. And he has this, you should link it in the show notes, his 30-second video showing this 5-step process of just going through these loops and screwing up, but then, getting better, and then moving up into the right.
Yes.
But you're kind of, you're cycling down. And like, that's what I love those little loops. And that's what truly brings me joy. And then of course, one thing I've really learned is it's not just, time with people, but really being present, I think, is something that meditation has given me, to be able to really listen and to not, let me think about what I'm going to say next and have my mind wander or, kind of glaze over, to really, really to lock in with another human being. Like that's a joy.
So I actually read Principles by Ray Dalio because Rich recommended it to me, guys. And I remember one of our first mentorship conversations, Rich, when I met you through your cousin, you told me to read it, and Principles is amazing. So it's not linked yet, but Principles by Ray Dalio. And for future viewers, as this floats out into the YouTube Sea as an evergreen asset, we will link that.
One more thing, if I may, is get Principles YOU, and it's a personality test. And I've taken every one of them, DISC, MBTI, you name it. And his is the best. The way he describes people is very, very relatable and helps to frame who you are. And my 3 sort of superpowers, my 3 strengths, if you will, I'm an inspirer, I'm a connector, and I'm an entertainer. And I always sort of knew that, but that's what I'm quadrupling down on now. And a lot of people are not even fully aware of their strengths, or even worse, maybe they even know their strengths, maybe they're keenly aware of them, they ignore them, and they focus on doing things that are not in line with their strengths because their parents told them, or their peers told them, or they read something about it, or it seems cool. I'm going to be a lawyer because I'm going to make a lot of money and I get status from it. And, I have a buddy, I'm the wrong side of 55, and he's also in his late 50s. And he's like, I'm a lawyer. I've always been a lawyer. I don't know how to do anything else. I don't want to be a lawyer. My parents wanted me to be a lawyer. My parents died a few years ago, and I don't even know why I'm still a lawyer, but I'm just going to continue to be a lawyer until I die. And you're just like, and he done good, but he's just like, I'd rather not do this shit anymore. Right. And doesn't mean that there's anything wrong with being a lawyer. Some people are really made to be lawyers, and you should be. Some are not. And some kind of shove the square peg into a round hole. I think it's really important to have like head, heart, and gut alignment. You should know what your strengths are, and you should find through trial and error what really makes you, interested. And sometimes your passions, people talk about following your passion, which is, really, we don't have to get on that rabbit hole. It doesn't mean like, I loved comic books as a kid, so I have to be in the comic book industry. I think a lot of times people find that they become passionate about things that they become good at. And they become good at it because they've just kind of grinded through. And then all of a sudden they think, oh, wow, I actually had completely eliminated this as a path, because I'm just like, I can't do this. This isn't me, or I wouldn't be interested in that. And then they try it out and they're like, oh, wow, look, this is actually something interesting. So I think you have to start with your strengths, though.
Yeah, what's interesting is I got into tech sales. I tried it out as an experiment out of college because I loved people and I wanted to be great, whatever that means. And I got into the SDR role at Oracle. You're setting meetings and building pipeline. And I had a good manager, Jarrell, who's really shaped my career. And it was a grind. And the SDR role is the tuition we pay for greater levels of freedom as you move up in sales. And a lot of the audience here, and again, thank you to the 5 people that are live right now for showing up, they're looking to break into tech sales or they already did. But what I found is that there was a moment when my manager told me, Chris, how does it feel to be last? And I got so pissed. I'm like, I don't even care about sales. Like I'm not even passionate. And I don't think you should say that to your manager, but I think my ego was hurt. But then I ended up using that as motivation and I became number one. And I think to your point, tying it back into what you said, I grinded and it wasn't the sexiest job, but it became my passion. And I think that's totally possible. So, Rich, I have a million questions for you, but I wanted to take a step back to beyond what's brought you meaning and joy in your life amidst all your travels and starting companies. What are a few, or maybe one awesome story and experience that you really enjoyed from all of your, whether it's your travels or business or speaking, that just a great story that you have?
Sure, I'm happy to share. But, just to go into meaning a little bit more, I really believe it's like who you're with, where you are, and what you do. If you can tick those 3 boxes, then I think you got most of life figured out. And I've been 0 for 3, I've been 1 for 3, 2 for 3, and now I'm 3 for 3. My relationship with my second current and final wife is amazing. Gets better every day, like a tropical teak hardwood, more solid. 3 kids I'm really close with. I love where I live, and I love what I'm doing. And if you don't have any of those 3, it's really important to be very intentional about that. And you can enact change if you're in a relationship or you're not in a relationship, or really make sure you choose your life partner well. That's probably the most important thing, because you can move jobs and you can move locations, but that life partner, it's absolutely redonkulous how not once, not even a sniff in all the education. You could have 3 PhDs and a postdoc, and nobody once talks about relationships and most important thing in your life, right? You're not going to get that in the educational system. And for the most part, I'm going to use broad strokes. And my parents were born in the 30s, and my grandparents were born in the 1800s. On my mom's side in Ireland. So, my mom didn't exactly have, I love her and she's amazing, but she didn't exactly have like the most up-to-date script or, version, right. Of how to be in a relationship in modern times. She's kind of bringing in some scripts and baggage from before, right. And you have to almost like unlearn all that stuff.
Yes.
So I think, that's something that's just really, really important, and just, lock that into your brain. Man, yeah. So anecdotes, stories, that's the other thing that I think is super important, is that my oldest son just got accepted to the University of Hawaii, and he's in a gap year right now. Thanks very much. And he wants to study English, and I think it's fantastic. I think he doesn't, need to do coding, especially with like AI. He's going to be a coder when he turns when he's in his prime in 40 and 20 years from now. Are there going to be people coding, or is it going to be people directing?
I like that you said prime is the 40 is 40s.
Yeah. The prime of his career, right? So it's he's going to you kind of 40 to 50, 50 plus is that's when, 40 to 60, I guess, is when you really, those kind of decades, and of course you can go longer, right? But I'm just saying, when you start to hit your stride, and is he, no. And I think he really understands how to do stories and narrative, because he's an omnivorous reader. He's writing copy for the biggest game company in Indonesia. He got to meet the founders. They came and visited my villa here in Bali, and they loved him. And then they hired him as an intern, and they hired him full time. So he's really doubling down on storytelling. And I think the ability to be able to tell stories well, that is something that is an enduring superpower. there's this great article you should link to called Crypto Bezos, where they asked Jeff Bezos, what's next? What's going to happen? And this is a long time ago. And he's like, who knows? I don't know. Nobody knows what's next. I don't know what's going to change, but I know it's not going to change. I know that people want cheap prices, good prices. They want fast delivery, and they want to be really comfortable in their choices. And those three things are never going to change. We're just going to optimize for that at Amazon and rinse, repeat, and whatever happens, now with Gen AI or streaming services or Web3, like who cares? He just can just optimize for those things. And I know some things, we're moving into this VUCA world, volatile, uncertain, all that, right?
Oh,
And it got even crazier with Gen AI. Gen AI just kind of snuck around the corner, and we're like, whoa, it's just, did aliens land? And what do I do? How do I deal with stuff? And I recommend to my students and companies that I advise to focus on storytelling, that more human connection, because we are hardwired as humans to absolutely surrender ourselves to story. That's how we conveyed information, and people rely too much on data and too much on numbers. And it's important to make a decision, sure, certainly, but to really inspire somebody, to really persuade somebody, to bring people on board. And you're always going to be selling, even if you're an introvert, even if you don't want to be in sales full time. You have to sell your raise to the boss. You have to sell this, new job to your spouse. You have to sell going to bed now to your kids. You have to sell your budget to the committee, ad infinitum. It's just, you're always going to be selling, and your ability to be able to tell stories is absolutely well worth the investment. The Man with 1,000 Faces, Joseph Campbell, Hero's Journey, that's super important. But I also love this quote by Saint-Exupéry, however you pronounce his name. It says something along the lines of, you want to build a ship? Don't talk of cutting down trees and tarring the planks and sewing sails. Talk of salty brine and open sea and exotic isles and buried treasure. You have to be able to paint a picture to inspire people and to be able to motivate them and plant a seed into their head. So I think that's super important. So I'll tell you a story. So yeah, please.
Question, teacher. So we're getting a lot of good comments. One from Omer and Masood, one of my friends out there. Thank you for showing up. So let's see. He's got a few questions in here, but is it not so much your story, but how you tell your story? Any thoughts on that?
I think it is your story too. It has to be your story, your ability to be able to personalize it and humanize it and bring it back to relatable chunks of your life or your journey. I think that's super important. And I'm going to tell you a story right now. So
cool.
I first came to China. I took the train through Siberia, through Mongolia to China in 93. I went overland from Switzerland to Hong Kong. And then I traveled around later. I came to Bali in 93, but I also went to Vietnam. And I was in Vietnam, and I met a guy riding a bicycle from China to Cambodia. And it really inspired me, because back in 88, I'd studied at Cambridge University for the summer, and I traveled around Europe, and I met this Aussie guy who had been traveling around the world for 4.5 years, and he had done it all by land. And he planted a seed in my head that there's only 4 trips on planet Earth. There's North, South America, one contiguous piece of land, then Europe, Asia, Africa, and Australia. And if you do those 4 overland trips, you can see and hear and feel, but more importantly, mate, you can smell the world. And I was like, oh, I want to smell the world. So I did this bike trip through Africa. So I was like, let's pick the toughest continent. Let's do it the toughest way. Let's do it while I'm still in my 20s. Let's embrace the suck. And just, if this is the baseline, let's go high, low, low. And then all the lows, they all crumble away, disintegrate. And then you get to scoop all the cream up from the top there. So I'm a week into my journey. I'm out of shape still, and I'm very close to the equator. I'm still in Kenya, and there's a big climb in front of me, and I only have an hour and a half until dark. And I'm like, oh, I'm not going to make it. What am I going to do? I had a tent with me, but I hadn't camped in the rough yet. And I see these two Maasai warriors, and you see these guys, and they're like well over 6 feet tall, big looping earlobes before that kind of crazy piercing became a fad for a while in the States. They have clay in their hair. They're wearing like red sort of, swaths of cloth. They have giant steel spears. And the only way you could tell that you were not in, the year 1000 or, 2000 BC was that they had car tires that they had cut, and that was their sandals. And pretty cool. And so I learned some Swahili, and those guys speak some Swahili too. And I said, hey, can I stay in your village? And they were like, all right, let's go. And so they led me off the road a few kilometers through a stream and up this hill. And there's this acacia tree, if you think of like Lion King, and it looks like kind of like an open umbrella. And the acacia trees have thorns that are like, longer than a finger. They're incredibly long and sharp. And I see this big cluster of bushes under the tree. And it turns out what it is, it's acacia branches. So they take these branches and they probably stack them about 2-3 feet wide and, 2 meters. Let's just go metrics, 2 meters high around their whole village. And then inside the village, there's 12 of these kind of like beehive style huts, these round straw, wooden huts. And then in the middle of that concentric circle is a corral, and the corral is filled with their cattle. So they whistled, and somebody moved a chunk of these torn down acacia branches aside. We enter the village, and then they plug it back in, keep all the hyena, jackals, lions, out of the village.
Yeah.
And I set up my tent, and I spent the night there. And they drink blood straight from the cattle during wedding and other ceremonies. The cattle is like really central to what they do, and it's also really important to be inside this safe circle. And the vast majority of humankind, we lived like that. We were tribes, and we lived in these extended clans. As the Dunbar number, 152 is the estimated number of people that we would have ever known, and where they were probably all extended family. And then after that, we probably broke off into another clan from there. So it was fascinating to live just one day in that environment. And you have to think about how we have been selectively evolved as humans, in that you want to conform and you want to collaborate with the other people in your tribe. Because if you don't, if you're a lazy ass and you're not, hunting with everybody, or if you're really disruptive, or if you're doing, very terrible things outside the bushes, screw you. That's it. You're a pariah. You're out. And you could survive a day, a week, a year, maybe, but you're going to die. You're not going to be able to consistently survive. So if you think about that, we're kind of like, you think about a lot of the animals that are in cages in zoos right now. Some of them that really survived and bred are the ones that are almost selected to live in captivity. So they probably don't reflect the true ferocious wild nature after a few generations of other animals. And probably us as humans too, like the ones that conformed, the ones that towed the line, the ones that didn't do things to make them look bad in the eyes of others. Those are the ones that stayed inside the bushes, and they bred and they proliferated. And I think that's still something, in the same way we go back to, animals, like when an elephant is in a zoo or a circus, they tie a super heavy chain around their leg, and that it digs into their leg, and it gets, bloody and horrible. And they learn early on, like, oh, I'm not going to pull on this thing because it's going to really rip me up and hurt me. Because when they get older, it's probably not possible to make a chain thick enough that's viable. So they just tie it up, and it just goes up. I'm not going to pull that because I'm already been conditioned. In the same way that we as humans are like, you know what? I'm not going to try that. I'm not going to do that. I'm not going to take that risk. I'm not going to be look foolish in the eyes of other people, because I don't want to be sent outside the bushes. And the fact is, there's no more thorn bushes anymore. There's no more wild animals. And when I talk to entrepreneurs, people often, ask, like, when do startups fail? And when do you think is the number one point where most startups fail?
I would say when they get too conservative,
that's one factor. It's also founder conflict, or running out of money, or
Yep.
whatever. But I would contend that the number one way of murdering a startup
Yep.
is for people to decide not to do it. Nope, I'm not doing this. I can't.
Wow.
I can't do it.
I see.
I'm too afraid.
Before it starts.
That's right. And I think even if you don't want to be an entrepreneur, I think that's okay too, of course. But oftentimes we self-censor ourselves. We limit ourselves because we're just too afraid of what other people think. And the fact is, most people are not thinking about you at all. Or even if you do something, you have to also consider that if you are going to do something that is probably going to fail, and it's very shitty along the way, then you're going to look foolish at the end if you choose to consider yourself as a fool for having not completed your journey. And you're going to look really foolish along the way, because you're going to make a lot of mistakes. And that's part of the process. It's not, it's a feature, not a bug. And that's the way that you learn. And I would contend that being an entrepreneur allows you to become, if you approach it the right way, the best version of yourself, because you get to smooth over all these, burrs and edges and rough spots, because you're constantly coming up against your, weaknesses and your blind spots and everything else. And then as long as you're radically open-minded and you're like, great, okay, good. Let's, that's really part of principles, is to be radically open-minded and to embrace and seek out feedback that doesn't feel good, because it's the only way you can improve. And I think that was one thing I've thought about since being inside that village, where I felt at once like very isolated, very, very off balance, but very safe inside there, and thinking like, wow, what would it be like to be outside these bushes right now? Like I did camp in the wild, later, but I think it was away from a lot of wild animals, but we really limit ourselves. And I think it's something really worth considering, really asking yourself, is this real? Am I just telling myself a story? Or am I really hobbling and limiting myself because some people who probably won't even remember me or remember what I did are going to potentially judge me?
Amazing story about how we tell stories that limit ourselves and cage ourselves in and keep us from venturing out to follow our dreams. And like you said, the biggest killer and startup killer is just not starting. And Omer, I appreciate your comment. Like, failing is the first attempt in learning, and it is learning. And you also spoke music to my ears about how entrepreneurship helps you brush up against who you really are and expand into the best version of yourself. And that's kind of my shtick with tech sales, by the way, is like, pick up the phone and call strangers that don't want to talk to you, get rejected. And it's almost like a mini like stepping stone to entrepreneurship. So that's my thing, Rich, is like, guys, some of you out there are going to want to be future entrepreneurs. And that's why having you on is in such alignment. And sales is a place to, with some training wheels to fail forward and learn. And obviously you hit on this, selling and telling stories is key to raising venture capital funding. And really, you even mentioned in personal relationships, getting your kids to go to bed. So do you mind if we talk a little bit about how you see sales, and maybe we'll throw marketing in there too. I know it's a little different, and how that fits into growing a business to start up successfully?
Yeah, I'm sorry. How what goes into? Could you just repeat that part? I'm sorry.
Can you talk a little bit, like, you want to start a company and you get over the hump of like starting, and you do start. What role does sales play in the success of a startup? And obviously we know it does play a role, but I'd love to get your spin on it and your vantage point, especially too, because this channel does talk a lot about sales as well.
Certainly, yeah. You really have to think of all aspects as you're selling. You're selling to potential team members to join you, and you have to sell them. You have to paint a really clear picture, I would say. And in some ways, I even try to discourage people to come on board. I'm absolutely crystal clear about what the role entails and the kind of lifestyle that will be around it, and kind of chaos and unpredictability in a startup that's pre-product market fit. And if you are able to both paint a very real picture but also inspire them, then you're really selling them to come on board, and you're kind of, pre-prepared them for whatever other challenges. You definitely don't want to sugarcoat it and then have people become demoralized and to eventually quit or just underperform. So I think, the selling part starts with that, and then you're selling investors, you're selling partners, you're selling to users, you're all of the time. And I think in typically as a founder, you kind of have three main roles.
Okay.
I would say, if you think about a bus metaphor, like you're driving a big bus through the desert at night, and you have a destination, and you're not going in a straight line, but you're kind of weaving your way there. So you have like a mission and vision, and then you got to get people on the bus, and then you got to keep the bus full of gas so it keeps moving. So you always have to align people with that destination, because that destination could have some changes, but the way that you're getting there along the way, you have to constantly over communicate. And that's really about selling people on that mission and vision. And you got to sell people to get on the bus with you. And then filling that bus up with gas, that means you have to poison the mind of investors so that they can poison the mind of other investors on their team, and then also do the same with through revenue by inspiring, really selling the product and service to your users. And I think one point about VCs is that the really important thing is you really want to be so clear and so inspirational to the venture capitalist the investor that you're investing to, so that they can then go back to their investment committee. Typically, maybe if it's an angel, it could just be a solo practitioner decision, but it's still a good rule of thumb. And then they can then inspire and convey your message to other people. So I think that kind of communication is super important, to be constantly telling your story and refining it and making it so that it really is a story. And I think that's one thing I've done with a lot of startups. I've mentored hundreds of companies through accelerator programs, and people try to be a little bit too clinical or talk too much about data and numbers and not enough about story, because people can't remember that. It's impossible to remember. Maybe you have one, striking data point, but you have to really make it resonate with some investor through story.
Yeah. So Adrienne Huger, thanks for showing up. And she said, thank you for your valuable advice and just sharing knowledge, Rich. So you're much appreciated. And we have a question from David Solomon, and he said, any recommendations on how to learn storytelling? I'm assuming, like, do you have a book recommendation or maybe a practical real world tip of getting out there and joining Toastmasters? What are your tips on learning to be a good storyteller?
I think speaking at events is really important. I did a lot of industry events, but I also started a lot of industry groups. So I think that's a real hack. I don't know if I shared this in the last podcast. Forgive me if I did, but
You might have, actually. I think you gave the advice to me in a way, like hosting people yourself.
That's right. So I tell my students like, oh, you want to be in enterprise social media bridging Europe and Asia? Like, okay, like pick like 3 things that you can stack on top of each other and it can be very like unique, and then start a WhatsApp group or a LinkedIn group or some sort of, you name whatever medium that is. Ideally, if you can, try to get people face to face together into a networking event once a month, once a quarter, then bring in a speaker and do a fireside chat with that speaker. So now you're sort of toe to toe with somebody who's kind of a senior person in the industry. They don't have to prepare anything. You say, hey, I got 4 questions. Tell me your story. Tell me what you're working on. Tell me your, lessons learned along the way, and tell me about the future, something like that. And then let's open it up for Q&A. And it's really, really simple. And then you just get comfortable with stage time. And you just gotta, I did stand-up comedy in the late 80s at Boston in 1989. And I met Rogan. Then we were both
Cool.
doing open mic nights. He was about a year ahead of me. And I remember, we're actually both born we're the exact same age, same day, same birthday. And I remember, even though we were the same age, I like looking up to him because he's already a click ahead of me. And he's like, you got to make that shit come out of your mouth, Richie. Got to make that shit come out of your mouth. Just make it come out of your mouth as much as you can. And you got to, just get stage time. So he's like, I give tours at the Boston Aquarium, make money in that. And I throw in some jokes. He had really blue material back then, really dirty stuff back then. So I don't know how he worked that into aquarium tours, but yeah. And then I also did I did a special show, and he came and performed, and it was, he was really funny, but he was definitely not the right kind of tone for the kind of show that I wanted to do. But he's like, I need that stage time. And I was like, you're hilarious. But, my family and neighbors are going to be there. And he's like, I'll tone it way back down. And he didn't tone it down. But anyway, it just like that was something that always stuck in my mind. You got to get stage time. So I started a comedy show called Chopsticks. And then I started bringing over my heroes, Louis C.K. and Jim Gaffigan and Russell Peters.
Wow.
And I got to, Mark Maron, WQF podcast. I, Just for Laughs Comedy Festival and Second City. So basically, and then at the same time, I did a lot of industry groups. And then in those industry groups, I did, we had Jack Ma come and speak in 1999 when he was just a 50-person company, and, all kinds of other, now billionaires in the Chinese internet scene, because we just created a platform to pull people together. And it's something, and then now what I do is I MC a lot of events, and I MC like a large stage at like Web Summit or something, and 2,000 to 5,000 people in the audience, and you don't have to prepare much, and you just show up and you have the clipboard and you bring energy and you have some comments, and but you get to meet all the keynote speakers backstage, and that's excellent for your network, and you get a speaker's pass. And I think just being a public speaker gives you credibility and expands your network and allows you to get access to things that you normally wouldn't. And I'm an extrovert, and I've always loved doing it. So it comes easy to me, and it gives me energy. But even if you're introverted, like, you can still get out your inner extrovert. People are on a spectrum typically, and they're just like, I can do this, but then I just need to go and energize myself, lick my wounds, do something else. But it's really, if you the compound interest on that of like doing that year after year, set up a podcast, do AMAs. I love Twitter Spaces. I'm doing a lot more Twitter Spaces now. I think that's something. And now there's LinkedIn Live. Like, just do those and pull people together and be a connector. And that's a great way to just, and you're going to be like, oh my God, I can't believe I said that. I said the wrong thing, or I just like totally zoned out, or I was like nervous. And but that's how you get better. I remember just one last story is, it was my second comedy show in Hong Kong, and I wrote something on my set list, some jokes, and I wrote laughter pause, big stars next to it, because the last time I did that joke, the last time I'd done a joke, it got a laugh, and I stepped on the laugh by continuing talking. I didn't give enough time. So like, this is going to get a big laugh. So I said it, and then I just let it hang and hang and hang, and there was just nothing. I was waiting for laughter that was not going to come. And finally, somebody in the very back row, somebody who I knew There's 300 people in the audience. And I even saw his, like, leaned over and he went, ah, like that. I groaned. And then everybody laughed. And then I felt like an asshole. And then I was just like,
Oh my God.
oh, and then I was just like, okay, I hung it too long. And then he groaned and they laughed. And then after that, I was swallowing my words. And up next, we have the our headliner. Up next, Rich Slice, everybody. And then I just was like, oh, I'm the biggest loser ever. I just totally tanked it. And then later that night, I had a couple of beers with Rich, and he's like, can I give you some advice? And I was like, please. I'm not feeling so good about my opening there. And he's like, yeah, whatever. He's like, nobody will remember it again. But
yeah,
people don't care if you don't get a laugh. People don't care. They're not there like, make me laugh, damn it. They're just like, nope, okay, next. But people really care. They really care about how you make them feel. So if you don't get a laugh, then your job is to not make them feel bad by seeing you feel bad, because it becomes this sort of virtuous cycle where you don't get a laugh and then you start swallowing your words or getting all kind of like frantic and like lose your mind. And then they like, oh my God, that could be me. And then you get even more weird. And then they're like, oh my God, I'm in seventh grade and I just showed up to class and I'm naked and there's a test and I don't know what's going on. And right. You just like your story in your head and you're just like, you just descend into this like dark place. And, way back in the day, it's before your time, but Johnny Carson from the Tonight Show, he would tell a bad joke and he would marinate in it. He would enjoy, or even like Louis C.K. does this, where he tells things that are just like really uncomfortable. And he's just like, I'm okay with it. I'm just like, I'll wait. And it's all right. It's like the most important thing is how you make people feel. And the way you make people feel good is for you to not feel good. So that's the most important thing. If you screw up, nobody really knows. Like I remember one time I was doing TechCrunch Disrupt. It was their first time in Beijing, 1,100 people in the audience. I ran out. Well, I got some coffee. I came back and I had all my notes on a piece of paper that I left at the coffee table, like way out the front doors there. So what I got up and I'm just like touching my pockets twice. And I'm just like, and instead of going, okay, guys, my sad list is down in the coffee. And I didn't bring you guys. And then you just lose everybody starts talking. And then like, you got to try to pull it back. And people are like, what a shithead. And so instead, what did I do? I just grabbed the mic and I hopped off the stage and I was like, hey, there's, Steve Chen from YouTube and there's Kevin Systrom from Instagram. And hey, look at, this, I just was like, hey, shout out to this person, shout out to that person. And then I popped out the door, grabbed my paper, and then I just walked back and I was like, all right, now up next. And I just like talked it through as I walked all the way back to the front of the stage. And nobody knew any different. I took charge and I just kept the energy going and I didn't give it up, because people are surrendering themselves to you. And as soon as you lose them, then they've lost confidence in you. And then it's like, it's really difficult to bring all of the energy back. So the most important thing is just keep calm and just it's okay. You don't have to, like, the worst thing is somebody gets up and they're like, I'm going to pitch today and I'm really nervous. And then everybody's like, well, fucking great. Now I know this is going to suck. And I know that, like, what do you want us to do? Like, what are we supposed to do? Pity attention you? It's like, you've chosen to be on stage here and you're going to come out and go like, this is going to really suck for everybody. It's going to be really awkward and make you feel really shitty. Okay, let's get started. Right. It's just like, it doesn't do it. And it also screws up your mindset too, to get up there and just be like, I'm going to really suck at this and it's going to really be horrible. And I'm just going to like tell people I suck already up front, make it even worse. So for sure, there's no way I can pull this out. Right. So that's what I'm like, you can be nervous. Like, how do you get confident? You can't just be confident. You have to have courage. And then after you get good at something, then you can be confident. So you have to have courage about it and you have to just suck it up and, practice.
I heard it said that courage only takes place in the presence of fear, and that fear gives an opportunity to be courageous. And I love what you said about basically taking responsibility for how you're making others feel. It's a bold thing to say. I don't know if you'll agree or not, but anxiety can be quite selfish. I guess it's okay to have anxiety, but it's like, what do you do with it? And
Yeah.
that's is, what do you do with it? Can you turn it into excitement? I'm sure you have many hacks, but ultimately,
Yeah.
it's like, how can I create a good experience for the audience? Because I've had these moments, Rich. I just relate so much with this podcast. And even before talking to you today, I know you personally, even though we haven't met in person, we've built a relationship over time. I was nervous and I was doing like a little bit of breath work to get in the zone. Or my last interview last week with Sally Doobie, I think it was last week. Immediately I kicked off the podcast. Hey, this is Chris Bussing. And I like had a verbal gaffe, like right to start the podcast. So,
Yeah.
but we're showing up, right?
Big deal. And who even notices, and it doesn't even matter. And that's part of the whole process. Anyway, yeah. And when you talk about people talking, like one thing that really kind of drives me crazy, people are like, this triggers me. And it's like, that's your choice. Like, that's your choice if it triggers you. Like, I'm not in control of your triggers. And maybe that's the very, very last thing I'll say is that, like, we talked about what also brings me joy. I think I do a lot of meditation. And the thing I learned through meditation is that there's some sort of stimulus, and then you have an emotional response, and then you have a space, and then you can decide, and then there's a reaction, and that reaction can be no reaction. Whereas where I grew up, it was stimulus, emotion, reaction, because my emotions feel very true. They feel true, and they are true in many ways, but they're not the truth. And what I mean by that is, we don't really have any ability about our emotions. We kind of don't. We don't have any ability over our thoughts either. Where do our thoughts come from? Where do our emotions come from? A lot of it's firmware. Something happens, there's a trigger, you feel an emotional response, you feel fear, anxiety, anger. Anger is usually like the public face of fear, whatever it is. But it's up to you to decide what happens. It's not up to me. You can't just say, hey, this triggers me, this makes me feel that way, so you're wrong. And that's absolutely like where I grew up in Boston too, that kind of bitter soil of just be like stimulus, emotion, response. Like, I must respond, or I'm weak, or like, this is how you do it. And then I didn't know that there was a choice. Like, I literally was a blind spot. Like, oh, I can just decide to do nothing, or I can decide to just listen and clarify and maybe respond in a kinder way, or respond in a more curious way than a judgmental way. And that's been one of the biggest superpowers that I've really gotten to help me with my relationships, with work, with everything, is that, it's absolutely up to us. We absolutely are 1000%. Like, we cannot control what happens to us. We have almost no control at all of whatever is happening outside the macro environment, and pandemics and competitors and people, and even your staff. You don't control your staff. You can motivate them. You can incentivize them. You can't control them. You can only control two things. The only two things that you can control is your reaction and your action, is your attitude and your effort. Those are the only two things that are in your control. And for people to put that in other people's area of responsibility, I think is very selfish indeed. I'm acting this way because you made me. And that's just immature and absolutely selfish indeed. So I would, really urge people, especially you're going to embrace entrepreneurship, where I often talk, most likely outcome is failure. It's a very rocky road along the way. Nothing's in your control except for your reaction and your action. So therefore, what are you doing to give yourself the very best ability to optimize your reaction and action? And I would contend that's sleep and diet and exercise and meditation and time with good people and self-reflection and journaling and rinse, repeat. That sort of self-care is not just indulgent or a nice to have. It's absolutely critical.
We've gotten such wisdom today in this conversation, or tonight for me. I think.
Have we? Is there somebody else joining?
Yeah. Not just about entrepreneurship and selling within that realm, but on how to live a full and meaningful life. I think you really hit at the crux of it. And that is what matters more than anything. So I just wanted to wrap up talking a little bit about the Founders Insights podcast that you host on behalf of Animoca Brands. And you mentioned your passion for Web3. And let's be real, I don't really even know what that fully entails. So if you could just finish up talking a little bit about the podcast and this whole realm that you're so excited about, and then we could wrap this bad boy or bad girl up.
Yeah, as I said in the beginning, the internet and blockchain had a baby, and that's Web3. Web1, you could just read the internet. Web2, now you could write on it, meaning post a video, audio, text.
Like this.
Now you can read, write, and own. You can own digital assets because they are on the blockchain, and that changes many aspects of the internet. In many ways, we are vassals in the fiefdoms of the Web2 giants. We work in the fields of Facebook and Google and Activision Blizzard and Twitter, etc. We're toiling away, and we do not own anything, and we are putting all of our time, treasure, data, effort into that, and we get very little in return. So we are in a shareholder economy, and that's fine. And there's producers and there's consumers, but in some ways with Web 2, it's become very distorted, and we are not the shareholders, but we are not only the consumers, but also the producers. So we're going to make you make everything and consume everything, and we get to take all the cream off the top. Thank you very much. Shut up, keep working. Thank you, sire. Thank you, sire. House of Zuckerberg and Lords of Google and Order of Microsoft and all the above. Web3, now you can own. So you can be a creator and a consumer, but also an owner of digital assets. And that is just starting to have the reverberations that are felt with some of, NFTs and other games. But we believe that games are the tip of the spear. 3.4 billion gamers in the world out of 8 billion, world's largest community, love virtual items, communities, and very comfortable with online. A lot of them are crypto holders, and you don't own your assets. You are only leasing them. And if the game shuts down or you want to be able to sell those assets, transfer them, it's typically not possible, or you don't really get upside around that. So, that's one area. There's many other ways that the blockchain is going to be leveraged to tokenize and gamify almost all other industries, work in conjunction with AI. In some ways, I think Web3 is going to be very critical for Gen AI, because how are you going to be able to tell the provenance of some sort of video or text or some sort of photo that's been created by Gen AI? You can use blockchain to be able to, crowdsource that and to, verify it in the same way that you sort of have a consensus protocol to verify that a block has been created on the blockchain, and it's kind of foundation for blockchain and cryptocurrency. So you're going to be able to see, like, okay, that's a fake, deep fake vid. This one's actually real. And of course, it'll probably become bifurcated or, tribal in some ways, where some tribes will claim it's real and some tribes won't. But, I think it's one sort of counterbalance to Gen AI. And I'm really keen to work with Animoca Brands, who founder is a friend of mine since '97, and his name is Yatsio. He's kind of Mr. Metaverse, the face of Web3, the Keanu Reeves of Web3, if I may. Nobody doesn't love the guy, and he's a real poet, philosopher, tech king. And I've drunk his Kool-Aid around the open metaverse and broad digital asset right ownership for the masses. And I love working with builders, dreamers, crazy, deranged, people who have a distortion reality field, and they're like, it's got to be different this time. I'm going to make it. And I'm inspired by that. So that's what my Founder Insights podcast is about, working with those people to hear about their mission and vision and their products they're building and their journey, their entrepreneurial journey, and their lessons learned along the way.
Rich, speaking of lessons learned, we've learned a lot from you today. And guys, as a call to action, check out the Founders Insights podcast that Rich hosts. I'm making up words. You're going to learn a lot from him, hear about some great founders and their vision, and I encourage you to check it out like I have. So that's linked in the description of this video just to make it easy for you. Feel free, shoot. Do you have anything you were going to say, Rich?
I said, boom, thanks for the link.
Oh yeah. I remember our last interview you did. You're like, Chris Bussings, ladies and gentlemen, boom. And you gave me such energy. I was nervous and you like elevated me through the energy. So boom, exactly. And feel free to, I'm going to go on a limb here, maybe shoot Rich a LinkedIn connection. He's extremely busy, gets thousands of requests, but hey, you got to shoot your shot in life, and feel free to connect with me too. And if anything, you'll probably be able to see a steady stream of great content coming from Rich on LinkedIn. I'm trying to think any other final calls to action, Rich, aside from checking out Principles and then that one other resource, which is the Crypto Bezos. Any other final thoughts or calls to action?
Yeah, you can follow me on Twitter at Richard Robinson. And
cool.
Really great to see you, my friend, and love to see your personal and professional evolution and onward and upward.
Thank you, Rich. You're an example of the North Star of where I want to be. And I mean that. So thank you for your time. And thank you to everyone who showed up. And that last straggler, I see you there. Thanks for showing up live and for the great questions. To your success in tech sales, entrepreneurship, and in life, happy selling and happy living. We'll see you in the next one.
Awesome.